Bord Gáis Energy, proud sponsor of the GAA All Ireland Under-20 and Senior Hurling Championships. Hashtag Hurling to the Core.
Hello and welcome to the Throw-In Independent.ie's GAA podcast in association with Bord Gáis Energy. I'm Will Slattery, delighted to be joined as always by Michael Verney. Michael, hello.
Will, how are you? How would you not be in good form leading up to the All Ireland Hurling Final, in fairness?
I know, and in this year of years, it's great to have it, isn't it? And a novel pairing as well, Limerick versus Waterford for the first time ever. It's a kind of a unique All Ireland Final. There won't be obviously any fans there. Will it have the same excitement for you?
As long as I'm there, I'm hoping to be one of the. I'm hoping to be one of the few that will get in there. I think even watching the semi-finals, I wasn't at either semi-finals. I was just watching them on the TV. It did have that same feel for me. Like I don't think you could say that the semi-final, the second half between Kilkenny and Waterford, lost much for there not being people there. I think it did still have interest in. There was lots of interest in it. It's interesting to hear John Mullane. He said last weekend in his column, that there'd be stories going around Waterford for years to come about beating Kilkenny, and he said when Darragh Lyons got the second goal, everybody jumped up on the couch, and his young fella ended up tangled up in the Christmas tree just in the middle of all the excitement. And he said he started crying, but the tears were fairly short-lived when they realised they were going to get over the line and that. But I think there's going to be massive excitement. It's going to be totally different. No meeting the president, no Artane band, no Garda escort. You're going to be driving up to an All Ireland Final in your car. It's going to be. It also takes away. There's no homecoming banquet. There's no dealing with tickets. I think you would have to feel for whoever the losers are going to be. Imagine the lonely feeling of driving back down from Croke Park, having been beaten in an All Ireland Final. It's probably something that you couldn't imagine, because in previous years, if you lose, you probably jump onto a bus. They probably stop at an off license and get a few drinks, and everybody lets their hair down, and you lose together. You win together, you lose together. But it's going to be different, particularly for the players. But I think between the white lines, I don't think there'll be too much different now for them. I think it'll be treated as any other game.
Yeah, well, it's sure to be an interesting one. We're delighted to be joined by Vincent Hogan to look ahead to the big game. Vincent, how are things?
Morning, Will. Good.
Yeah, great to have you on. We have a novel All Ireland Hurling Final pairing, Limerick and Waterford for the first time ever meeting in a decider. And I know you've kind of followed the Waterford revolution quite closely. I remember you had an interesting interview with Pádraig Fanning after he stepped down following his very tumultuous year in charge. And I suppose it would have been very hard then to predict that, come final time in 2020, amid everything that's happened in 2020, that they'd be back. What have you made of Liam Cahill coming in and how they've gone quite from where they were at the end of last year to now being on the verge of potentially ending, that long wait for Liam MacCarthy?
Well, the first thing you have to say is Liam Cahill has done an extraordinary job. But you're right to kind of mention Pádraig Fanning, because I think what we saw with Waterford as the Derek McGrath era came to an end, and they had a terrible last year under Derek, and they never really caught fire at all for Pádraig. And they had that famous finally getting a championship match back to Walsh Park. It was their opening game in the Munster Championship last year against Clare. Really tight, tentative game, and they lost it by a point, and that was the end of Waterford. They were shocking for the remainder of their games. And when you look at what Liam Cahill is getting out of largely the same group with a few new faces, there's such a high work ethic and such high energy levels to everything they're doing, which is exactly what they weren't doing for Pádraig Fanning. So while the Waterford players have been magnificent for Cahill, and the coaching of Mikey Beavens has been really, really outstanding, I think the players themselves will look back on last year and they'd have to ask themselves questions. Did they really put it in for Pádraig Fanning? I think Pádraig Fanning has a good enough CV in hurling across so many different jobs that maybe it was an accident at the worst possible timing for him to go in there to a dressing room that was so used to Derek McGrath's unique kind of man management of these guys, the kind of the schoolmaster's pupil type of thing, that he had a very holistic relationship with so many of those players. And Pádraig stepped in straight at the end of that. And I think it was just bad timing for Pádraig Fanning to go in there. But, they've bounced right back from that. And they have been a breath of fresh air, Will. They really have been the team that has ignited this championship.
Yeah, Michael, interesting point Vincent makes there in relation to, I suppose, Waterford's form line under Pádraig Fanning, and then going back to the end of the Derek McGrath era, because I think it was 9 championship games maybe without a win. I don't think they'd won a game in Munster since 2016 until this year against Cork. So, like, they're staggering statistics. And, the growth of the team, Liam Cahill came in, set out a stall very early, cut some big names, all-stars and Noel Connors and Mara Shanahan. You even saw his ruthlessness, in the game against Kilkenny, taking off Jake Dillon after, a mediocre start. He hasn't been afraid to go in and shake things up and change things.
No, he's definitely made the hard calls. As Vinny said, I definitely do think Pádraig Fanning deserves a big mention, because we hadn't really heard of Conor Prunty or Calum Lyons or a lot of these guys until Pádraig Fanning put them in. They had a tough season last year, but they have an inter-county season under their belt and are much better players and much more prepared now this year. As regards Cahill, maybe it's just easier for an outside manager to come in that situation, ruffle some feathers, do things his way. He's not, he's getting in his car and he's driving back to Ballingarry or wherever in Tip, and Mikey Beavens is driving back to Toomevara. They don't have to listen to the conversation. They don't have to listen to people down the street telling them what they should and shouldn't be doing. And in fairness to Liam Cahill, he's always been his own man. I remember a famous quote, and Vinny had it in a piece recently about him, where he said he was, on about parents involved talking to him when he was Tipperary manager in 2015, Tipperary manager. He's saying, every parent thinks they know that their goose is a swan, basically. And he also said that he wasn't going to send soft hurlers up the line. This is a lad who will come in and make the tough decisions, and he won't apologise for it. There was probably uproar maybe when Noel Connors and Mara Shanahan were dropped. He obviously saw that maybe these guys didn't fit into the style of play that he wanted. All high energy. He has cornerbacks attacking now. He has Shane McNulty, bursting out and sticking the ball over from his own 65. Shane Fives was doing similar earlier on the year. He's Calum Lyons driving forward. They have an unbelievable energy to them. Like, who could have said that when Limerick absolutely obliterated them? I think it was 124 to 10 points in Walsh Park last year, that these two would meet the guts of about 18 months later in an All Ireland final. It's been a remarkable turnaround. And from a Waterford point of view, the optimism, it must be, I know from even chatting to John Mullane and a few others, the optimism down there is huge. They've beaten Kilkenny in back-to-back championship games now. Don't think, if it had ever been done before, it was probably back in the late 50s, early 60s. They're kind of coming right just at the right time. Guys that maybe were quiet in the Munster final, the likes of Jack Fagan, even Calum Lyons, have had huge games now in the All Ireland semi-final, and they'll fancy their chance to turn it around. And just on Cahill as well, Liam Cahill obviously played in the only other time when Munster finalists ended up playing in the All Ireland final in 1997. He scored a goal against Clare. He knows what it's like, to lose a Munster final and to lose an All Ireland final. He also knows what it's like as a manager to turn around a Munster final defeat. They were beaten 13 points in the 2018 under-21 final by Cork. Turned around and beat, a hotly fancied Cork team with a load of guys playing senior hurling now. Beat them by 3 points in the final. So he'll know what he has to do, and I think he has Waterford in a really, really good place coming into the game.
Yeah, Vincent. And then in the other corner, you have Limerick, a team who I suppose all that seems to be missing from their CV is that second All-Ireland win over the last couple of years. They've put together a body of work, bar maybe one half of hurling against Kilkenny, that ranks probably up there with a lot of teams over the last, however many years you want to go back. As they played Waterford in the Munster final, they beat them in the Munster final, but they were troubled that day as well. I think in the last water break, the game was really in the melting pot. They are the favourites, but what do you think their approach to this game will be?
Well, let's not beat around the bush here, Will. This is a Limerick team that absolutely categorically believes they left it behind them last year. That since the 2018 win, they've won back-to-back Munster titles, back-to-back National League titles. And they believe that but for that 20 minutes, that first 20 minutes, particularly against Kilkenny in last year's semi-final, that they would have won the All-Ireland last year as well. And there's something very concerted and calm about this Limerick team. But you're right, the one team that has really challenged the idea that you cannot contest the middle third with this Limerick team is Waterford. And what we saw in the Munster final was the aggressive, direct running of a Waterford team that were saying, we're happy to have this physical contact. We're happy to run into contact, and we're not going to come backwards off that contact. I thought the aggression of Waterford's running was the one thing that really challenged Limerick in a way that no other team has. You look at the semi-final against Galway, did you really ever believe they were going to lose that? I didn't. I thought their indiscipline probably kept that game alive. They gave away an awful lot of frees. They gave away 7 frees in scoring range, or 8 frees within scoring range for Joe Canning. Waterford challenged them in a different way. And we saw the likes of the Jack Fagans coming to life that day. The Callum Lyons is just bring it on. And I think that's what makes this interesting. When you look at what Liam Cahill did with Tipperary, the under-21s that won the All-Ireland, the under-20s that won the All-Ireland, they were a team without stars, but they had that willingness to put their bodies on the line. And we've heard anecdotally from John Mullane and these lads how hard they've been training right through last Christmas. The only way you can play the game that Waterford are playing is with a huge level of fitness. But it's a very smart game they're playing too. You know, people thought, well, we won't go back to seeing Tadhg de Búrca protecting the full back line. They have done that because it's not just all this high energy aggression. It's very, very clever as well, because when you have Tadhg de Búrca protecting his full back line, I'm not sure there's a more intelligent hurler in the country than Tadhg de Búrca. So it's a kind of a mix of the old school Liam Cahill, let's be self-sufficient here, let's stand up and win our battles. And then you've the tactical nuance of Mikey Beavens coming in as well. It's just been a perfect storm.
Yeah, you've good 1-2 punches on both sides with John Kiley and Paul Kinnerk as well, you know, in Limerick and the job they've done, Michael. Like, so if you're Waterford and you're the underdogs, what's the top of your list in terms of like tactically how you're going about like stopping Limerick? Is it the half forwards of Gerard Hegarty and Tom Marcy who you need to shut down? Like, if you're kind of in that management team, what are you looking at?
Yeah, it's a fine balance. I think they did a great job at shutting down their half forward line in the Munster final. Tom Morrissey was quiet, Gerard Hegarty was quiet. As a result of that, Kevin Moran was probably quiet and Kenan Lyons was probably quiet because they were marking the two of them. But that was the day when Limerick kind of realised that they weren't going to win the game through their half forward line, and they won the game in their full forward line. The last day, it was funny because Galway were playing a sweeper. They realised they couldn't win their game in the full forward line, so they won it out the pitch. They won it by shooting out the pitch. So Waterford will have to, it's a tricky kind of a balance between keeping those half forwards as quiet as possible, and that probably means pushing up quite high on them, but also not leaving too much space in front of the full back line. You're expecting, Graham Mulcahy was very quiet the other day, even when he cut out Éanna Murphy's short puck out, you're just thinking he's going to pick it up and put it in the back of the net, but it was a couple of unusual mistakes, and that was all around. And I genuinely think there was a bit of fear the last day in Limerick, just a fear of losing possibly again, a fear of falling at that stage again. As Vinny said, all the titles that they've amassed the whole way through, it would have been a disaster if they've been beaten in a semi-final. I'm expecting a different Limerick than we saw in the All Ireland semi-final. I'm expecting a Limerick that's a lot more relaxed. I'm expecting that when David Reedy comes in, that he just taps over those points, or they take those goal chances, and they're a lot more clinical. What do Waterford have to do to beat them? I don't think they'll beat them in a point shootout. I think they tried probably maybe to force the issue a small bit too much in the Munster final, but they did get through for a couple of half goal chances. Maybe it's just a matter of Stephen Bennett, I remember in one instance, just maybe forced the hand pass a little too early and tried to put it over someone. Maybe it's just a matter of taking it on a bit more. But Vinny mentioned it earlier on there as well. I definitely think it's a point worth making. In the first 20 minutes of the All-Ireland semi-final last year, Kilkenny got 3 or 4 handy enough frees by just running at Limerick. Waterford did it in the third quarter. It got them back into the game. And Galway didn't do it that much the last day. But I definitely think when they did, I counted, I think, 6 scoreable frees in the first half from just taking on their men and running at them. Limerick are quite robust in the tackle, and they give away a lot of frees. Like Gerard Hegarty's brilliant hurler. His tackling is very questionable. He gives away 3 or 4 softish kind of frees in every game. Limerick don't seem to want to let you strike a point from play over the bar. They'd much rather foul you and maybe you put the ball over on the advantage or you take a free. They're very reticent to let you break the line. I think Waterford need to do more of what they did in that third quarter last night when they got back into the game by just taking them on. And as Vincent said, they obviously have that level of physical preparation where they feel like they can do that. And I think they'll go after that. They won't be, a lot of other teams, they avoid maybe the middle third or try and play the ball around. I don't think Waterford will do that. I think they'll go through that middle third. And it's going to be really, really interesting. I do give them a really good chance as well, I have to say, because I think they can take them on physically.
Yeah, and just in terms of Grode Hegarty, obviously he had that, loose tackle, I think, on Joe Canning as well, which, if the referee had seen or kind of seen more clearly, who knows what the decision might be. And Vincent, I guess the fitness of Aaron Gillane is a big question mark as well. I think he was rated as 50-50 by a member of the management team at their press night. Even if he does play and he's a bit stymied, like, he's a key man in that inside forward line who contributes a lot of scores for them. If he's not right, like, that could be a big, game changer potentially.
Yes, it could be. But what's interesting about Limerick and Gillane, historically in recent years, has been a real goal threat, but they haven't carried much of a goal threat this year, even with Gillane in the team. I think in 3 of their 4 games, they haven't scored a goal. Now, Limerick seem to have adopted the view that when you have wing forwards like Grode Hegarty and Tom Morrissey scoring for fun from 60, 70 yards out, you don't need to go inside. I think they may feel they can do that again against Waterford, but Waterford will feel they need to get goals. And I don't think Waterford can outscore or outpoint this Limerick team. So I think Liam Cahill will be trying to get in at that full back line. It's funny, we thought at the start of the year, no Richie English, no Mike Casey, question marks about the Limerick full back line. Have they been answered? We don't really know. Dan Morrissey's been very good. Barry Nash has been fine. But no one has really got at them. It's very similar to the Dublin football team. They're so well protected by the structure that Limerick have that we still don't really know how comfortable Dan Morrissey is in that position. So I think Waterford have to go after them in a way that Galway didn't. Galway, for example, were happy to play Pádraig Mannion as the extra defender and just try to play this big physical, outscoring them from distance. And I think had Galway shown more of a desire to go for goals, we'd have learned a lot more about this Limerick team. Something that I think Waterford will feel that's what they've got to do. They've got to ask questions of the Limerick full back line that no one really has done so far.
And another thing that they'll probably want to do is, limit Limerick's effectiveness after the water breaks, Michael, because I suppose of all teams, they seem to be availing of it, as good as anyone, the little reset, the kind of the word here and there from a member of the management team about something they've noticed over the course of the opening quarter or the third quarter. They've been really effective at really kicking on after that period. Yeah,
there was no sign of Paul Kinnerk's tactics board the last day. I'd say they just probably thought that they were probably going to get it thrown in their face if they did, that they were actually breaking the rules of the water break, because technically there's not supposed to be any coaching during the water break. But they've been unbelievably effective. I think in nearly every game they've won the second and fourth quarters. I think to the best of my knowledge, maybe apart from the last day, actually, I think they might have lost the final quarter last day, but they've been really, really effective. And it's funny, it just, as you say, it is a reset. You can into a lad, as many times as you like, but when you go out in the white heat of championship, sometimes things go out the window, and just to be able to reset and just say, okay, we're not getting joy inside, we need to take scores from outside. That's a very, very simple thing. They're playing a sweeper, we need to score from outside. If it's the next day and maybe Tadhg de Burke is out a bit further than Waterford would like, it's okay, de Burke is coming out to the 65, we need to get ball in over the top. And it's just simple little messages like that. They seem to be very, very effective at doing it. And Limerick seem to take the messages on board really, really quickly and put them into action very, very quickly. Like the start of the second half, even, I know, against Clare, it was 4 points within, I think it was 90 seconds nearly. So whatever it is about them, they're obviously very well coached, but they're able to take the message and implement it really, really quickly, which is, hugely impressive. And I think from a Waterford point of view, they'll be just trying to not limit the damage after the water break, but just try to make sure that they're not hit with, you know, a couple of sucker punches straight away after the first and second water breaks. Because we see they're huge now. They're massive. Like, it's something that, like, imagine, say, a year ago that we'd be talking about water breaks. Like, it's amazing how things change. But they're huge now. They're mini halves. I know as a player, you're literally thinking, okay, we get to the first quarter, get to the end of the first quarter, then things change. Then maybe, like, Galway had different tactical formations, no more than Limerick did, for different quarters the other day. You can do that now. You're splitting the game into 4 quarters. But they are going to be huge, and Waterford are going to have to make sure that they're not hit with, you know, that they're not losing a quarter after a water break by 3 or 4 points. If they do, they're going to be in trouble.
And on a slightly sentimental note, Vincent, and Limerick fans might resent the question, given that they're hardly even steeped with senior success. They won it obviously 2 years ago, but like, what would it mean for Waterford, you know, to finally bring Liam MacCarthy back down there? You know, I think 1959 is the last time they've won it. That's a long time ago. You know, what would it mean for the county?
Well, I would suggest Tony O'Houlihan puts his hands over his eyes if they do, because you can only imagine the social distancing down in Dungarvan and places like that. Look, we remember in 2008 when they unexpectedly, under Davy Fitz, got to the All Ireland Final against Kilkenny, and they ended up having 2 press nights, one in Dungarvan, one in Walsh Park, because there was the political side of keeping everybody happy. And it was very, very hard to keep the hype at bay then. And it was the same thing 2017 under Derek McGrath. They are just so hungry for it. It's 1959 since they won it. And, you know, when you have that length of time, it's a bit like Mayo in the football, there's a desperation for it to happen. But the funny thing about this one, Will, is that because of the unique circumstances we're in, that there are no crowds going to the games, that there is no question of people going into press nights and that, and it's actually dampened down a lot of the hype. I also think it helps that Liam Cahill and Mikey Beavens aren't from the county. I think there's a calmness in Waterford this time. There's a sense that this is just business. We still have to wait and see how they are on Sunday. You know, it's all very well to talk the talk, but you go out in this big game. But you would have to say that Cahill and Beavens, their track record in getting the team right for All Ireland finals, albeit underage finals, is top class. So I think, look, the celebrations would go on well into next year if Waterford could pull this off. But right now, I think the circumstances and the unique circumstances we're in will suit them perfectly.
Just on that, Will, it was interesting. A couple of weeks ago, the sports psychologist Kate Kirby put out a tweet, and I thought it was really interesting, and it totally is in line with what Vinny is saying there. She just said, I'm increasingly believing that COVID might be playing into the hands of counties with less experience of big occasions, lack of crowds, muted build-up with pubs closed and players working from home, so interacting less with the community, hype and tension less and focus increased, ? And I genuinely think that's true. Like you're not getting, it's very easy to fall into the back slaps and, oh, you're a great lad and all this, a great win, and how will we go the next day? And, you know, it's hard to avoid that, particularly in a county like Waterford. So I definitely think it's suiting them, no more than I think it helped Cavan in the Ulster final and Tipperary in the Munster final. And as well as that, the day of a match, like, if you get hit with a goal, there's not like that pressure on you straight away. There's not the noises and cranking up, and, you know, Jack Fagan hits a wide early in the first half, and it's not like, ooh, you know, that kind of, you know, horrible feeling where you're like, oh Jesus, the world is caving in around me. And I think teams' ability to react far more positively to a setback has been seen loads of times throughout the way with how games are now. And as Mullane said it before, I do think the panels and the backroom team, the noise that they make does have a big effect. And some of the noisiest teams or backroom teams, I would say Limerick are definitely one of them. When Grode Hegarty hits a ball and it's going over the bar after 5 yards because they're literally roaring. So the influx of another 10 or 15 bodies into the arena for the All Ireland final will be interesting. But I definitely think it does help the underdog, helps teams that maybe aren't as used to reacting to the pressure, just with the way things are set up now.
Yeah, and I thought, as you mentioned, Limerick and Waterford have probably been two of the loudest teams on the sidelines during these games, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the final. Guys, you might finish up with predictions. Michael, I'll go to you first. Limerick, Waterford final. Who do you think will come out on top?
Yeah, no, I tipped Limerick at the start, and I'll stay with them. I genuinely think they're going to win, but I think they'll win hanging on. I think they'll win hanging on. I think Waterford will throw everything at them, and I think it has the potential to be a really high-scoring final, and I think it has the potential to be an absolutely thrilling final as well. And if Waterford hit the net a couple of times, it's going to be so interesting. I do expect them to hit the net at least once. But I think Limerick will win, just hanging on by probably 2 to 3 points.
Vincent?
Yeah, look, I think we all tipped Limerick at the start because we know what the likes of John Kiley and Paul Kinnerk must have been feeling watching Tip win the All-Ireland last year, having been beaten by Limerick by 12 points in the Munster final. They just have a calmness about them. They have an impact off the bench. The funny thing is, Waterford are getting an impact off the bench too. I just think there is a kind of been there, done that feeling to this Limerick team. I think Waterford will throw the kitchen sink at them. And what's interesting about this is, we saw how Limerick went after Éanna Murphy's puckouts in the semi-final. I think Galway won only 8 out of 15 of their own long puckouts. Kilkenny had the same problem against Waterford in the second half, particularly when Waterford scored an astonishing 2-16 from play. They went after Owen Murphy's puckouts. So there's a self-sufficiency in both teams. I agree with Michael. It's making for a classic. They're the two informed teams, but you just have to give Limerick the edge in terms of their big game experience.
Yeah, it's set up to be an absolute cracker. Who knows? We might be looking back at one of the all-time great All Ireland hurling finals in a week's time. But for the moment, Vincent, Michael, thanks so much for joining me. That's all we have time for this week on the Throw-In association with Bord Gosh Energy. We'll be back next Monday with a podcast reviewing the All Ireland Hurling Final. And in the meantime, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next Monday, thanks for listening and goodbye.